All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming. My name is John, if you don't know me. I'm the pastor at Northwind Community Church. Hey, Ryan, hey. All right, so we're a new church plant. We're starting right here. We meet in this very room. And as a matter of fact, on Saturday nights, we're so new we haven't even launched yet. We didn't want to wait to launch to start ministry. So we wanted to do something that would really impact our community. And so we came up with this idea of these life skills classes. This is the very first one. We're super pumped. Yay, we got more coming. If you want to find the schedule for the ones we're doing it the rest throughout the fall, you can go to northwindcc.org/events. You can find out what we're doing. You can sign up for that. You can also there's a whole bunch of QR codes and a bunch of stuff that we gave you. You can just click on that with your phone and it'll take you there too. All right, we're going to hear from our special guest speaker in just a minute, but just so you're aware, when you came in, you got a blue folder, right? So a couple things to let you know about. You got a couple of note cards in there. What we're asking for is if you have any questions or any ideas like, oh, I would like to know about this life skill or that life skill, or maybe something Alyssa says piques your curiosity and you want to know more. Write down your question and maybe your name and email on one of these, and then give them to me at the end. What we're going to do is our last life skills event is going to be an Ask Me Anything session. So we're going to have a big panel. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can that we get. So anything you want to know about, just write it down, let us know, and we'll try to find the answer for you. And if it's really good, we might just have a life skills class devoted to your topic. So there's that for you too. Second, you'll notice there's a flyer in there that my wife designed that's really nice looking.
Nice job, Jessica.
Yay! So this just tells about us and when and where we meet, which is right here on Saturday nights. So on the back, there is a community survey. So one of the things we want to do is we want to find out what people in our community think so that we can design ministries that will help them. So all you have to do the survey is get out your phone, click on the QR code, and it'll take you to a link where you can fill out the community survey. I would really love it if you did that because, again, we take these, we want to do ministry that is impactful and that means something to the people here, and that's how we want to find out about that. So you can do that later. And then finally, we're talking about anxiety tonight, and we're going to give you a lot of really good tips about how to reduce the anxiety in our own lives. But of course, for those of us who are Christians, we know that we can find rest in Christ, right? Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, I will give you rest." So that's why we're handing out Gospels of John to everyone. So that's our gift to you, to read, to find comfort and rest in Jesus. So if you want to know more about that, you can certainly talk to me afterwards. All right. So we're really excited to have a special guest speaker tonight. This is Alyssa Kirkman. She's a licensed counselor. Her passion is actually teaching people about how to deal with anxiety. So it's really a good match. I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit more. The only other thing that I need to tell you is that she loves greyhounds. She has an 80-pound greyhound at home. So afterwards, ask her about it, okay? Dog people. I'm a cat person, but it's okay. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn over to Alyssa, and here you go.
Yep.
All right, how's that?
I can move it. I'll
Cool.
stand forward up here. So. All right, so hopefully I can talk loud enough for everyone to hear me in the back. But like I said, my name's Alyssa Kirkman. I am a licensed mental health counselor. We've been in Seattle for about 3 years, but I went to school at a little university in the middle of Arkansas called Harding University, where I got a master's in an education specialist degree in clinical mental health counseling. When we moved up here, I worked for a while for an inpatient unit at Overlake Hospital, worked with some people there, and then also been in private practice. I'm advertised under Seattle Christian Counseling, so if you look me up, it'll be under Seattle Christian Counseling. And so in private practice, I've worked with trauma, anxiety, and depression. And most recently, I've been shifting into working with what are called the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So this is going to be your postpartum depression and anxiety, as well as miscarriage, infant loss, and fertility. But I also do love talking about anxiety in what we call psychoeducational settings like this, because I think there's a lot that we can learn that will help sort of mitigate. These are skills that I wish that I'd known when I was in high school, would have been super useful. So to start off with, I have this picture of a toolbox. Everything we talk about here today is going to be from what I call a trauma and cognitive behavioral therapy background. I think that works well in the psychoeducational settings. If any of you have individual therapists, they may use a completely different approach. And if that works for you, that's great. I like to think of it as we like to have a toolbox, and in that toolbox we want to have multiple tools to use for multiple different types of stressors and life events. So the things we learn here, again, they may be different if you have any sort of individual therapy going on, but hopefully we'll just be adding more things into that toolbox for you. So I'm going to try to talk today for about 45 minutes and then have some time for questions at the end, and yeah. So first off, let's start with some definitions. You probably have like synonymous words for fear, like anxiety, stress, worry, and it all just kind of generally defines uncomfortable when we face something that just doesn't feel very good. So I want to do some differentiating here. The way I define them might be a little different than you might hear elsewhere, but that's okay. So first off, let's talk about fear. Fear is I have it defined here as an emotional response to a known threat where the danger is real, definite, and immediate. So this is a biological response that happens in your brain. You might have also heard it called like the fight or flight response. And we use the word fear when it is something that we can tangibly see in front of us. Next, I have stress. Stress defined as a response to an external known threat when we believe that threat, whatever it is, will overwhelm our coping skills or our resources. The threat does not have to be definite or immediate, though. And I'll give you an example in just a little bit to kind of go through all of these. But the thing about stress, we often think stress is bad, but stress can actually be kind of good and bad depending on how we handle it. If you think about any time you've had to turn in an assignment for school, or some sort of project at work and you've got a deadline, and that deadline creates a little bit of stress in you and it can be motivating to get it done. Stress becomes unhelpful when our coping skills and our resources externally, like social supports and all of that, are not enough to manage whatever that stressor is. The thing is, if we face a stressor and we learn how to manage it, we turn in that assignment, we go to that basketball game and play in front of people or do some sort of piano performance. There's going to be a little bit of stress involved in that, but once we learn how to do it, we learn those skills, and then going forward we have those skills. So again, stress doesn't always have to be bad. It can be very adaptive, but it's when it is ongoing for a long time, so you're chronically exposed to a stressor, that it can become unhelpful. Or that, again, that stressor itself overwhelms your coping skills or your resources. Then we have anxiety. Anxiety is more of a vague and persistent sense of dread or apprehension. And the threat is, again, it's unreal, unknown, or imprecise. It can also be a situation in which your response to a stressor is outside of what we might consider normal, which is a really vague definition again. Different things might be normal for different people. So one way I like to define a difference between anxiety and stress is often related to external factors, and when those external factors relieve, the feeling of stress should relieve. Anxiety is often related to internal beliefs, and when the stressor goes away, anxiety persists or worry persists. And anxiety can often be related to negative past experiences. That's kind of the definition of trauma, an overwhelmingly negative experience that kind of changes your perception of yourself or the world. And then going forward, whenever you face a similar situation or a trigger, you have an overwhelming response. Again, it's when it's vague or unknown or like unreal that we call it anxiety. So have any of you guys experienced anxiety? Like, hands up. What would you describe as the typical symptoms of anxiety? How do you know you're feeling it? Shout out answers. What?
Heart palpitations.
Heart palpitations, yeah. What else?
Overthinking.
Overthinking, racing thoughts, definitely. Or another way to think of that is like rumination. Anyone get like shaking?
Feeling like you're going to pass out.
Yeah, that can happen. Sort of like a mind fog or difficulty concentrating can be part of it. In kids, you'll hear a lot of what we call somatic complaints, so like my stomach hurts, or they'll get headaches, which those can also happen in adults too. You can actually sometimes also see literal physiological responses like increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, all of that. So what's going on in the brain, this is my little cartoon of a brain here. When you experience fear, anxiety, or stress, or whatever it might be, you're experiencing that in what's called the limbic system and the brain stem. So if you think of, I like to use the brain example of like a fist. And in the center, you have your limbic system and your brain stem right here. Your brain stem is in charge of a lot of the autonomic type stuff, so the increasing blood pressure, heart rate, all of that. The limbic system is like the emotion center, like where you actually feel some of that. Can be anger or irritability or like, again, that fear. So what's going on when you encounter a stressor is, I always like to use the example of a bear. If you're like walking in the woods and you see a bear, you're gonna have a fear response. That is our known, definite, immediate threat. And if you think about your brain again as like a fist, I'm just gonna use this instead of flipping back and forth. Your cortexes that are wrapping around your like limbic system where you have your higher order thinking. So that's gonna be like future planning, abstract thinking, logical reasoning, emotional connection, all of that. When you encounter like a fear response, like a bear, you don't need to operate in your cortexes super a lot. That's not really a phrase, but. So what happens is, Dan Siegel likes to use the analogy of flipping the lid for anger or for fear. Your limbic system and your brainstem are in charge, and your cortexes are kind of like offline a little bit. The reason why is you just need that fight or flight response to kick in. You don't need to logically think through necessarily all the reasons why you need to respond to the bear, you just respond. So that would be a fear response. Stress, I like to think of it as though you're like walking in the woods and the threat of a bear like might be there, but it's not in front of you. But it's not like an unreal possibility. And then anxiety would be more like you're kind of walking in the middle of a town and you're expecting to see a bear. It's not real, it's not in front of you, and it's not likely to happen. I've also heard it phrased as like fear is when you're in the middle of what's happening, and anxiety is like thinking about it's possible that that might happen. And I always use this example when I describe like fear and anxiety to people, and like how if you walk in the middle of a town, you're not going to encounter a bear, so that's anxiety. And then I came across this picture on the internet in Lake Tahoe, and this guy is definitely having a fear response. I did read the article. He was able to chase the bear off without getting hurt. So this might give you anxiety about going to a convenience store now. So, but that would be then like if he's got this like really abnormal situation of encountering a bear in the middle of a store, he may have then a fear response going into a convenience store for a while going forward, which would be that trauma effect again of like something overwhelmed your expectations or your coping skills, and then going forward you have triggers. And the way we typically then work with that is like exposure to whatever that stressor is until it no longer stresses you out or causes anxiety. So I think I've got a handout in your little packets on the window of tolerance in this. So I don't know how clear this is on the screen as well, but this is pulled again from like trauma research, and I like our past experiences almost always influence how we perceive the future experience of like stressors or anxiety. And so it's important. So if you're thinking about, we all kind of have what we call the window of tolerance. So within this window of tolerance is where we believe our coping skills and our social resources and other resources are able to manage our daily life stressors. And we're kind of living in this window of tolerance. It doesn't mean there's no emotions. You have lots of emotional responses within the window of tolerance, but it's when you encounter, like if you can see this, arousal activation loop, and then you settle, and then this is like, you don't need to worry about all of that, but whatever is happening, here's you're living within the window of tolerance, and you can handle whatever that is. So this might be, let's say, you get a message from your boss that you need to have a meeting, and you immediately think to yourself, what did I do wrong? If you've had like negative experiences at work before. But if you have like good coping skills and all of that, and you're able to manage that stressor, you're able to then kind of like settle yourself and think clearly and be able to, okay, all the stuff I've turned in for work recently has been good, I've liked it, I'm pretty sure this isn't going to be that big of a deal, and you're kind of able to use those cortexes and stay within your window of tolerance and not have your quote-unquote lid flipped. When we are in this, outside of our window of tolerance, this can happen because, again, chronic stress, it's like chronically going on and we're not getting out of it, and our coping skills and our social resources aren't enough, and then we're kind of living in like our response is like increasing into what we call hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Arousal meaning the arousal, what's the verb form of that? The limbic system itself is aroused. So hyperarousal is going to be when you begin to experience like anxiety, panic, anger, racing thoughts, feeling overwhelmed, shakiness. It can be irritability, rage, sleeplessness. You can also sometimes see like digestion issues and pain crop up in this. Or hypoarousal is, again, your limbic system is kind of like on fire, but your experience of it is more like numb, shut down, turned off, depressed, low motivation, exhaustion, withdrawal, lethargy. You can still see digestive issues and pain in this area. And so if you have a lot of experiences of really negative past events, i.e. trauma, you can kind of like be triggered easily, and then you're like in and out of this rapidly. It doesn't take much to push you outside of the window of tolerance. In addition to that, if we're just thinking about our like daily window of tolerance, there's various things that we can do to narrow or expand that. So first things first is if you are outside of the window of tolerance, if you're in that hypo-aroused state, again, the lid is flipped, your cortexes are not in charge. There is not much logical thinking you're going to be able to do at that point. So if you are feeling like in one of those states, the first focus is to come back what we call into the window of tolerance. The problem solving and all of that can happen later once we've worked on settling and coming back and feeling more balanced and aware. So generally for like hyper-aroused coping skills, you want to think like calming, centering. Here's some examples of, and I think there's another handout that goes through these. But deep breathing, mindfulness skills. Do you guys know what mindfulness skills are? I feel like this is a hot topic in therapy a lot, but a lot of people hear it but don't actually know what it means. Does anyone have an example of a mindfulness skill that they know of? No? All right. Mindfulness is all about being in the present. So remember, when our lid is flipped, we're outside of the window of tolerance. We are like living in like a future situation or like reliving a past situation, and all those symptoms are going on. We're having a hard time thinking clearly. So mindfulness, our skill, like skills that bring you back into just feeling what's going on in the present moment. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this. What's going on in the brain is some of the structures that require you to focus on the present are in the cortexes. I think I see some stress balls going around. That is some of your like physical sensations and all of that are going to be in some of your cortexes. And so when you squeeze that stress ball, you're trying to activate that cortex activity to kind of like close the lid, as Dan Siegel likes to say. Other mindfulness skills are going to be things like just paying attention to what's going on around you. You can do an orienting response of like looking for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can, hear, 3 things you can smell, I think 2 things you can feel, and 1 thing you can taste. Just like going through the senses and paying attention to what am I actually physically experiencing right now. I know prayer is a type of mindfulness. Meditation is a type of mindfulness. There's lots of different types of mindfulness skills, but it's all going to be about, okay, what is immediately going on around me? And I'm going to bring my brain's awareness just to what is immediately in front of my face or in my body. I think I got this from Stephen Porges' work, I think. I might be wrong about that. But he uses an example of something called like a self-hug. And it's where you just kind of like take a hand, tuck it in here, and then take this hand and bring it around and give yourself just kind of this like, it's like a hug. But what's happening is you're kind of doing a containment thing. I don't know if any of you guys have kids, but infants, you know that sometimes when they are upset, if you kind of wrap them up and keep them tight, then they kind of settle. Funny enough, that kind of works for adults too. That's ultimately what a weighted blanket is. If you see those weighted blankets going around for anxiety, we're coming around and we're containing and we're feeling where our body is in space. And we're activating those cortexes and those physical responses to kind of like bring awareness to the present. You can also do progressive muscle relaxation. Have any of you guys heard of this? There are tons of YouTube videos on this. And that's where I would honestly start if you've never done it before. Just like search on YouTube, progressive muscle relaxation. And it'll actually walk you through it, but I'll give you a brief explanation. So progressive muscle relaxation, you can go head to toe or toe to head, whichever you prefer. And I always like to go head to toe, but you focus muscle group by muscle group, whichever direction, and you tense up that muscle group, you squeeze it really hard and contract it, and then you release. The point of the tensing it up is to bring awareness again to that muscle group, because if I just say right now, relax your shoulders, it might be kind of like might be able to focus in on it, but if I say like tense and contract your shoulders and you do this, then you get more of a feeling of where those are, and then you like can relax deeper after that. Or like, again, you can like squeeze your forearms and then relax. It's also kind of what the stress ball does. So a full progressive muscle relaxation exercise, sometimes it's like 20 minutes of just going again, like starting with like forehead muscles and then cheek muscles. So you're gonna make weird faces when you do this. And then just going all the way down. Gentle stretching in yoga. Yoga is great for calming and centering. You're using your body a lot. There's a lot of mindful awareness. If you do yoga classes, when I've been in them before, they'll talk a lot about feel like the energy coming up through your feet, which is going to instinctively bring your awareness to how your feet feel, which is inherently grounding in mindfulness. You feel your body in the present moment where it's in contact with the ground. And warm bath, warm tea, think again, calming, relaxing. Aromatherapy, some people like to use aromatherapy, and you'll have like your favorite smells for that. So then the hypo-aroused coping skills, again, this is if you're kind of in that depressive numb state or like lethargy, withdrawal, kind of shut off. If any of you think you haven't experienced it, I guarantee you have. I'll show you exactly what it looks like. You get home from work and you do this on your phone, on social media, and you just zone out. That's like a mild form of what's going on. So if you're kind of in that state and you want to reconnect with the present, you probably want to think connecting, energizing, moving, fast, upbeat movement, go for a walk or exercise or go for a run. Drink cold water, hold an ice cube. When I worked for the hospital, we would have some oranges in our freezer, and people could grab an orange and kind of play with that in their hands a little bit. Upbeat music, cool air. We're coming up on the cooler season here, so that's a great opportunity. If you're kind of feeling like checked out, go step outside for a moment. Feel that temperature difference. So these are all potential skills to get, again, back into that window of tolerance, into where you feel your cortexes are in control, where you feel engaged with the present, you feel like you can connect with other people, you can think clearly, you have empathy, all of that. So, goal number 1, doing that. Afterwards, we want to talk about expanding the window of tolerance, so increasing your resources. I have a list of some protective factors up here, but this is not a definitive list, and everyone's list is going to look different, and these are just kind of like random examples. But social support. It's hard to really downplay how important social support is. And having a lot of people that you can talk to and connect with, because again, remember, your cortexes use emotional connection. And having people that you can go and talk to when you face a stressor can be really great for calming down that response. So I like to use the example of this. If you guys have ever been around a young child that gets startled, so think like small child that's in a room and the thunderstorm comes through, which there's not a lot of thunderstorms out here, but and if they've never experienced thunder before and there's this great big loud sound and they get startled, their first response is find caregiver. So what they're doing in that is assessing what's the caregiver's response. Is the caregiver afraid? Because if the caregiver is afraid, then I need to be afraid. But if the caregiver is calm, then I can go to them and get that comfort and kind of mimic off of them those relaxation skills. So when you're really stressed about something, if you have a friend who's just zen or not in that stressor with you that you can go and be around, you will begin to mimic their body language, mimic that kind of calming response. Talking through it, all of that is helpful too, but it's that nonverbal communication of being present with them that you're going to feel from them. Physical health. If you're not feeling good, it's really hard to use your coping skills. And it's really hard, again, to underplay how important sleep is. I heard this recently, that the average American over the last 50 years has gone from an average of 8 hours of sleep a night to an average of 6.5 hours sleep a night in the last 50 years. That's a huge societal change. We were mostly meant to have 8 hours of sleep. And if you want more on sleep, I can give you tons of references on that. But there's a guy named Matthew Walker right now. He's got a book called Why We Sleep that is excellent, highly recommend. Lots of research on sleep and why sleep is important and how sleep affects our long-term health and why we need to prioritize and really take care of that 8 hours. As best we can. There's periods in time in life where you can't have that, like having a newborn. You get no sleep. It's just kind of funny. We always assume, if you interact with babies and toddlers, if they get low on sleep, you're always oh, they're going to be kind of cranky tomorrow. They didn't get their nap. We're just going to kind of make excuses for them. But then we expect that adults should just be able to handle no sleep or little sleep perfectly. But again, the same rules apply to us. When we're low on sleep, we are much more likely to shoot out of our window of tolerance. Other things that can help expand that, a sense of purpose. If you're in a stressful situation, but you feel like you have a purpose to it, or you feel like you have a direction that you're going or meaning in it, that can help you withstand that and access resources. Self-esteem can affect it, coping skills can affect it, and then healthy thinking. This is our cognitive triangle for healthy thinking, and it kind of talks a little bit about what we've been talking about, but this is, again, from cognitive behavioral therapy. Their theory, or foundation of their theory, on how humans function, how we all interact. So we've all got thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And these are all influencing each other constantly. And then in the center of that are some of our core beliefs, which is going to be like influencing how we assume the world works. I like to think of core beliefs as glasses. So if you inherently believe that the world is a dangerous place and you kind of have that as glasses on, like rose tinted, well, I guess that might be like black tinted glasses, sunglasses, you're going to see everything distorted through that perspective. So if you believe the world is inherently dangerous, then the person walking down the street at you in the middle of the night is inherently a dangerous person. Versus if you think the world and people are generally good, then you may not necessarily assume that. So your core beliefs then influence how our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors interact. So along the behavior line, this is some of the coping skills we've already been talking about. Using your body, using your behaviors, your sleep, your physical health, all of that is how that kind of plays into how you experience your thoughts and your feelings. The thing about feelings is a lot of times when we feel uncomfortable, that's where we want to intervene. If we feel anxiety, depression, sadness, that's where we want to intervene and change. But it's actually much more effective if we instead look at behavior or thought, because I'm sure you guys have all experienced this, but if you have felt anxious, if you could just decide to not be anxious, you would have done that. It's not quite that easy. So we want to look, again, behaviors like we've been talking about or thoughts. So I'm going to go over what are called, just like briefly, cognitive distortions. Cognitions meaning thoughts and distortions meaning distorted ways of thinking. So once we're, again, back within our window of tolerance, we want to be able to evaluate what went on, what shot us out of the window of tolerance. Is there anything about the perception of the stressor or the event that was distorted? This is just a list that I pulled from Positive Psychology, but there's a lot of different ways to categorize cognitive distortions. Again, you can look these up. I don't want to spend a lot of time really deep diving into each one of these. So there's 2 slides here, but we'll start here. So cognitive distortions, they've got filtering, catastrophizing, polarized thinking, heaven's reward, control, always being right, fallacy of fairness, personalization. So let's take the catastrophizing as a cognitive distortion. I've also heard this one called magnification. So if you look at a different list, it might just call it magnification. Or sometimes it's like the worst case scenario thinking. So a catastrophizing of an event might look like if you get let's say, you're taking a test, which some of you are in school, some of you aren't. I see a mix of ages. You're taking a test and there's 10 questions on it and you feel like you weren't quite sure about 2 of those and your brain immediately goes through, I failed this test. And now that I failed this test, I'm never going to be able to get an A in this class, and then that's going to go on my GPA, and now I'm not going to be able to get into a good college, and after that I'm not going to be able to get a good job, and now my life is ruined. That is catastrophizing, where you're kind of having a negative event going on and you keep just expanding how bad it can get. Filtering is where we focus on the negatives of an event as opposed to the positives or the neutrals. This is sometimes also just called the mental filter. I've also heard it called disqualifying the positive, kind of 2 sides of the same coin. So it might look like this. Women are really guilty of doing this with body image. You look in the mirror and you only see the things about yourself you don't like. And you hyper focus in and you zero in and that's all I can see about this. Or you look at an event in the past or a relationship in the past and you only see or remember all the negative things that you experienced in that event or in that relationship. And the way we challenge filtering is we try to identify what are the positives or the neutrals. Do any of you watch Doctor Who? Have any of you heard of that? The show from the 60s? There's actually a quote from one of the more recent seasons that I really like that I feel really describes how we can challenge filtering well. And this is a paraphrase, it's not a perfect quote, but basically It's that all of the negative things, or all of the good things, don't make the bad things oh gosh. Of course, it's because I'm up here and I'm experiencing a little anxiety that I can't think clearly. But the bad things, or the good things don't make the bad things go away, but the bad things don't make the good things unimportant. It's a balance. Life is a balance of bad and good. And if we look at something and we only see the negative or we only see the bad, that's of course going to lead to feelings of sadness and lowness or anxiety. So we want to be able to have that balanced perspective. Polarized thinking, it's also called all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking, is when you create false dichotomies. So I am a complete success or a complete failure. Or a situation is all good or all bad. There's some overlap between these, but it basically ignores the complexity of what life looks like. Heaven's reward is the idea that it says expecting self-sacrifice to be rewarded. That if I do all of these things, I should get this good outcome. That's not quite how the world works. If any of your parents told you life's not fair. There's a lot of truth in that. There's also the fallacy of fairness. Always being right, where being wrong is unacceptable, or being right supersedes everything. I have to be right, and if I'm wrong at all, then people will somehow know all of my major character flaws. Personalization, assuming that everything has to do with you. It's at the grocery store and you make eye contact with someone and they kind of make a face and you assume, oh, they must think I look weird. When in reality, you have no idea what they're thinking. It could be maybe they thought you looked like someone and then realized you didn't and they were about to say the wrong name. Or maybe they don't feel well. You never know. This also crops up in texting or social media. Let's say you're texting back and forth with someone and they stop responding and you assume that you said something wrong. Or you assume that you've offended somebody. When in reality, we have no idea what's going on the other end. Maybe they got distracted. Maybe, I don't know, life happens. But personalization is whenever we assume external events have to do with us. The way we challenge that is, again, we try to think, what could potentially be going on in this scenario that's different than the way I'm thinking about it? Go ahead and move on. Overgeneralization assumes a rule from an experience. So I failed a math test, I'm bad at math. I'm just bad at math. It's not going to be good. So I'm just going to kind of accept that, and this is going to be my D class, and I'll balance that out with everything else. There's also, I don't see this on here, labeling or mislabeling, which I like to think, oh, here it is, global labeling, extreme generalization. So it's when we take that single negative event, like maybe you fail a test or you get a bad grade, and you say, I'm bad at math, and then you go into, again, I'm a failure, or I'm never going to be good at school. And you create kind of that overall I statement that you begin to apply to others, life scenarios. Blaming is another one where you're assuming everyone else's fault and you're not able to self-reflect. Jumping to conclusions, there's two big categories here on jumping to conclusions. It's making assumptions based on little evidence. There is future telling, or I also like to think of it as future tripping, when in your mind you're beginning to play out a future scenario, and as you're doing that, you're living the experience of the future. So let's say you have to give a presentation. And in your mind, you're beginning to think all the ways that presentation could go wrong. And you're beginning to, in the present, experience the anxiety of what would it look like if that went wrong. And you're kind of putting yourself through that, when in reality, a lot could happen between now and the future, like preparing for the presentation, or maybe some massive world event happens and the presentation doesn't happen. And then all of that effort that you've put into worrying about it has suddenly become unhelpful. I also see a lot of mind reading, which is similar to jumping to conclusions, or mind reading similar to personalization, but sometimes we assume we know what people think when it has nothing to do with us. Of like, oh, I just know that, she thinks that that other person isn't a nice person. We're like, well, you can't read anyone's mind. Anytime you think you know what someone thinks, you don't. Even if you know the person really well. This is actually a big problem in couples counseling. Really big problem. Check your assumptions. You could have been together for 20 years and still not known in a situation what your partner is thinking. Anytime you think you can read someone's mind, just assume that you can't. And then the should statements. I encounter a lot of these. I should get my homework done. I should do that presentation. I should call that person back. We think shoulds will be like a helpful form of motivation, and maybe if you're not struggling with depression and anxiety, like it could actually end up being a helpful, like you just kind of like, oh, I should get these things done today. But if you're in a spot of like feeling really low and you have all these should statements going on, you're not motivating yourself. You're just kind of making yourself feel guilty for what you're not doing. So when you're sitting and like binge watching Netflix and thinking to yourself, I should do the dishes, and then like another hour goes by, and you feel that tension building of like, ugh, it's so dirty over there, but I'm just gonna kind of live in this space of thinking about that being here. That's a really miserable spot to be in. So the way there's different ways to look at motivation. If you're gonna like have the question, how do I motivate myself to get stuff done without using should statements, you do a lot of like looking at like what are pros and cons of our choices. And that's something that if you have any type of individual therapist, or if you're doing like any cognitive journaling or anything, there's like ways you can kind of go through that for yourself. And then emotional reasoning is when you think your feelings are facts. I just feel like the world is going to end today, which in 2020 that may have been true. Or I feel like, again, this person doesn't like me, but like you can't read your mind and feelings are not facts. I feel like I am just absolutely failing at this work project. Feelings are not facts. So anytime you're using a type of like feeling or like response to something, you want to be able to challenge that. It's not that the feelings are invalid, and that's the difficult balance that's like we need to, sometimes like people need to parse through. If there's like, let's take the work example, some reason why you feel like you're failing, maybe you've had a really negative work experience in the past where a boss like yelled at you for making a mistake on a project. And then you kind of have this foreboding sense of like, I cannot fail at work. So we don't want to say that emotional reasoning comes from nowhere, that evaluating feelings isn't important, but we don't want to assume that our feelings are facts about a current situation. So that's just like a general list of cognitive distortions. Again, you can find them like listed out differently if you just Google cognitive distortions. So what do we do with our thoughts? There's a couple different things. First of all, I think I have a thought record in your handout as well. It should have like seven columns, but I've seen like 3-column thought records and all of that. The best way, if you're struggling with a lot of negative thinking going on in the background that you're not aware of, the best way to start to become aware of it is to start recording it. If you feel anxious, what was going through your mind as best you can remember when that was happening. Record that down and see if you can identify any distortions in that. If you go through the process of identifying a distortion, oftentimes you'll like naturally be able to come up with what the challenge would be. Again, like, oh, that's emotional reasoning. Feelings aren't facts. What are facts about this? And then in the thought record, I think I have thought record right here, but like you have the feeling, you kind of scale the emotion, you assess what was going on, you assess what you were thinking, and then you can do proof for or proof against. Well, both, yeah. Or what is an alternative challenge to that? It kind of depends on what the thought is. And again, like if you have any questions, this is like I'm speaking very broad generalities, and it really depends like what's the specific scenario and how I want to approach challenging it. Cognitive journaling is kind of a similar thing to thought records, but it's just more like a free-flowing journaling response of like, What was the event? What was the behavior and the response? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? How can I change it? Focusing on gratitude. No one ever wants to do this when you're feeling like really negative about the world of like, I don't want to look at what I have. But it's actually really helpful. When you focus on gratitude, again, you're able to see, okay, today what am I thankful for? Today what is going well? What do I enjoy about life? You're having to exercise your brain a little bit and using those cortexes a little bit more. In fact, I watched this TED Talk where this guy talked about how like happy people are basically able to recall things they're thankful for really quickly, and that when they did brain scans on people who were thinking about things they were thankful for, it was the fastest way to light up some of these cortexes around here, the prefrontal cortex and all of that. Rumination, I think someone said overthinking earlier. If we're in that space of like, we're kind of like lid is flipped, we're overthinking racing thoughts, like how am I gonna solve this problem or this scenario, and I cannot stop thinking about this as I'm laying in bed at 3 a.m. and my mind is just going. Rumination and overthinking is usually your brain's attempt to solve the problem, but the issue is it's not solving it productively. There's a difference between rumination and processing. Usually, there's a guy named Guy Winch who's got a TED Talk, and he's also got a book called Emotional First Aid. That's really good. And he talks about rumination. But if you're thinking about a problem or a stressor for longer than a couple minutes and you're not feeling better about it or coming to a conclusion or solving it, then you're ruminating. And it only takes a couple of minutes of solid distraction away from whatever that rumination cycle is, because you kind of get caught in a thought loop, to be able to break away from it. And that TED Talk, again, if anyone's interested, I can give you the link to it. But he talks about how the majority of work stress actually happens outside of work. And that's the source of burnout. It's not when you're at work doing work, it's when you're at home thinking about work. And like, oh, I didn't get this done, I need to do this tomorrow, and all of that. And you're just ruminating on everything. So with rumination, you want to break the thought loop. You want to redirect or you want to distract. You want to do something that takes your attention fully. Usually, Netflix is not quite enough to do this, because it's just kind of like playing on a thought loop in the background while you're watching whatever you're watching. So things that are more like talking to somebody about something unrelated, or doing some type of puzzle, or something that engages like a full brain focus on whatever that is a way to break that thought loop and then calm down, and then you can reassess, okay, do I need to problem solve this? Something else I like to do with people, we call it schedule the worry time, which sounds really silly, but is really helpful, again, in those middle of the night ruminations, when you become aware you're ruminating. Set aside like 30 minutes every morning of, this is my worry time. These 30 minutes here, this is my worry time. So if you become aware that you're worrying about it outside of that, your brain has kind of an acknowledgement of, oh, we have time to problem solve that tomorrow. This isn't the time to be thinking about it, and set those boundaries with your brain and like intentionally redirect. And then the acceptance paradox is another way to kind of like work with some anxiety and thoughts. The acceptance paradox is that whatever anxiety you're feeling, we need to work on kind of accepting the emotion of it and not trying to control the emotion of it. Again, if you could just decide to stop being anxious, you would have done that already. And this can look like, because like what sometimes ends up happening with anxiety is you're experiencing it and then you start to get anxious about being anxious, and then it like kind of escalates on itself. Panic disorder is inherently when you start to have panic attacks about having future panic attacks. And I like to think of anxiety sometimes as like, it's this like vibrating ball within you that you think, to get it under control, I'm gonna squeeze that ball tighter. But what ends up happening instead is you're just focused on that feeling. This is so uncomfortable, I need to get it to go away right now. And then all you can think, all you can feel is that racing heart, that tenseness, those racing thoughts. So the acceptance paradox is an approach where you just kind of say, you know what, anxiety's hanging out with me today. It's just gonna, you can externalize it, give it a name if you want. We're going to be friends today. I'm going to be experiencing some of this today. And I may not be as productive at work as I might on another day, and that's okay. Working on just kind of accepting that, because most people find that once they're able to accept an element of that anxiety is going to be present, then that takes away some of the power of it and kind of like lessens its effect. It's not a perfect solution. There's other things that you also want to implement then, but. So yeah, those are just some thought interventions, some basic coping skills, and that's kind of like a summary of ways to start with anxiety. Again, these are all different tools to potentially put in your toolbox, but none of this is a substitute for actually working with an individual therapist or somebody, like if you find that that's what you need. They can talk you through some of this stuff a little bit more in depth and personalized to whatever is going on. So that is about what I've got for today. Does anybody have any questions? Questions, comments, concerns, jokes? That's how I like to end all my sessions. Yes?
I have a question. Do you have any good thoughts or ideas about like changing the way that you talk to yourself, like self-talk helps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I'm doing like a positive self-talk exercise, usually I'll identify what is the specific scenario. And this is like something someone would maybe do potentially multiple times over their week. So let's say, I always like to start off with the grocery store. You'd be amazed at how many people are stressed about going to the grocery store. But let's take a look at the fact that it's like usually like really bright fluorescent lights. So you're like visually overstimulated, lots of colorful advertising, people around you, and you have to make decision after decision after decision on what you're going to buy. So it's like a perfect storm for anxiety. And so if we're having a lot of negative self-talk entering into a grocery store scenario of like, I hate making decisions, this is going to be really awful, this is like my least favorite part of the week, and you kind of have those automatic negative thoughts going on, what I'll actually have someone do is take a piece of paper and have like a before, during, and after column. And we're gonna write out all of the negative thoughts that might come up to you before, during, and after whatever the event is. And we're gonna flood the paper with a bunch of the negative thoughts, which sounds overwhelming, but there's a reason why I do this, because then I wanna flip it around and just like reflect. Let's take a look, written out, what do looking at these negative thoughts make you feel? And usually there's like a very visual sense of just like, discouraged, despondent, hopeless. And then we flip the paper over, do the same thing before, during, after, and we do challenges to each of those thoughts they wrote down. So, and they need to be realistic challenges. That's another thing about challenging your thoughts. So let's take the, I hate making decisions thought. If you just say, I love making decisions, that's gonna feel not super real. We wanna find a way to make the thought challenge feel realistic. So let's say a potential thought challenge would be, I hate making decisions, but I know I've done this before. And I'm learning to do it slowly right now. And that is a way you can kind of like alter that thought slightly to give yourself more motivation and hope moving forward. So let's say you're having a lot of negative self-talk around taking a test of like, oh, I'm so bad at math. I'm so bad at all this problem solving, or I hate fractions, or algebra or calculus or whatever it is. And you have the thought of like, this is really difficult. We can adjust that slightly. We're not gonna pretend like it's not difficult. That's just gonna, like, your brain's not gonna believe that. But a thought challenge that might be helpful is, this is really difficult, but I know who I can ask for help. This is really difficult, but I know that I can look this up online and maybe get some extra resources. This is really difficult, but I know that I can learn hard things and I can do hard things. And so again, whatever the event is, we go through and we write out all of those challenges, and then again, I do the very visual, let's take a look at all this positive self-talk or challenge self-talk. And how does that make you feel? What are the actual feelings coming up looking at that? And usually people will report something like, oh, a little bit more motivation, a little bit more hope. Again, it doesn't necessarily fix it, but it gets us moving forward. I hope that answers your question. That's how I would start with challenging self-talk. Any other questions?
I got another one.
All right, go for it.
So how would I know what the line is between anxiety I can work on just using some of these tools and anxiety that I need to go find a counselor for? Like how would I make that decision?
I think if you're asking that question, find a counselor. Which is like really hard right now because I don't know if any of you guys have tried recently, but everyone's full. So usually when we're looking at like where do we actually begin to diagnose anxiety, or when do we start wanting more immediate interventions? In the DSM, our diagnostic manual, it has this really awful phrase that says like basically significantly affecting the life, which is super subjective. That whatever the symptoms are, they are significantly affecting your life somehow. So this might look like, and again, like in some of these, it's like looking at some like time factors when you're looking through the DSM. So depression is, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's like you're feeling all of these X symptoms for at least 2 weeks, and with like no relief, 2 weeks or longer, and it's like persistent beyond that. It might be a month. It's been a while since I actually looked at that, but usually people wait much longer than 2 weeks before they see a counselor, so that's not even a question. So yeah, there's some of those those like factors of like how much is it affecting your life? Are you finding that you're unable to go to the grocery store because it's giving you so much anxiety? That you're avoiding going into certain scenarios, that there's parts of your life that you're unable to engage in? Then at that point, like we would say, let's go talk to a counselor. Does that make sense? Other questions? Yes?
What are some daily habits that you recommend to help break cycles? Like, I have a problem with ruminating very much, and I talked to a career coach, this is mostly about my job.
Yeah.
And she recommended reading like a bunch of habit books, like the Power of Habit and other things, so that you can break those cycles, because it's almost like the need advice from you.
Yeah. That makes me want to ask you a lot more questions. So with breaking habits, like if we're looking at what are just daily general habits, not just with like rumination, but that are going to be those protective factors against anxiety, I'm going to say 8 hours of sleep, starting point. Some people actually need more. Anyone who says they need less, I might challenge and say, let's try 8 and see what happens, if it's possible. Again, when you have like new kids or new babies and all of that, it's not always possible. So sleep, I'm also gonna want you to like see if you can talk to a doctor potentially about anything wrong with your thyroid or any other like physical issue going on, if you've got any physical health issues. So like we wanna do the baseline of taking care of the physical health. Then from there, implementing some daily routines of like, I would say 5 minutes in the morning or the evening, starting with a mindfulness type of meditation. And there are tons of apps for this. I usually refer to one called Mindfulness Coach. It's put out by the VA. I refer to it because it is free. Things like Headspace and Calm and those other ones, they're great, but they have like, here's our free portion and now try premium, which always annoys me. So anything put out by the VA is completely free, and they've got tons of like recordings in those that are really useful. So I would say, even if you're not actively feeling anxious or ruminating in the moment, doing a daily habit of like 5 to 10 minutes every morning, sitting down, doing mindfulness meditation, will improve your ability to then handle rumination or other like stressors later on. I like to use the analogy of like coping skills are inherently skills, like any other skills, they need to be practiced. And if you only use your coping skills when you're feeling anxious, that's kind of like only playing piano in concert. You practice piano, you practice basketball, you practice all those things a lot before we quote unquote put them to the test. The same is true again of our coping skills. So practicing progressive muscle relaxation every morning, you're building up the brain structures for your body to inherently be able to do it. Then when it counts, i.e. when you're outside of the window of tolerance, your brain already has those structures sort of built up. And your body will be like, oh, I know how to do this. We've been doing this already. So there's some of like the daily routine things that I would like guide someone to practice on building habits. And then like with work, again, if you want to listen to Guy Winch's TED Talk or read his book, Emotional First Aid, he's got a lot of tips. But he talks about putting guardrails around our thinking. And when we notice that we're kind of like beginning to go outside of, like if you're talking about work stress, it's 5 p.m., work from home is another whole like boundary issue problem because you're like in your work environment constantly. You can find lots of tips on how to deal with that. But you'll want to, once you become aware that you're thinking of it, because most of the time our brain has already gone like 10 minutes down the rabbit hole before we're even aware that we're thinking about it. But once you become aware that you're thinking about it, you can schedule the worry time for tomorrow. You can do a positive distraction, talking to someone, going for a walk, whatever it might be to change your environment, change whatever like it is that's like in front of you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a place to start. So. Questions, comments? All right.
Cool.
That's about that.
All right, yeah, let's give her a hand. Well, I know I learned some stuff. I'm gonna have to watch this video again, I think. So a lot I was taking notes, but didn't take enough notes. Well, I hope that tonight has been a blessing for you. I know it's been a blessing for me just to, again, be reminded of some things and learn some new things. So I've got some things that I need to go do, like sleep 8 hours a night, that I certainly don't do. Anyway, thanks to everyone for coming. There's a lot of snacks and things, but I do want to say a special thanks to Alyssa again, and from Northwind Church, we just want to give you a gift for your time. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to clap for it again, too. What we will do, too, is we will make the PowerPoint available, and we will also, we are recording this on video, we will be putting this on YouTube, on our website, on social media platforms, so that you can watch it again, so that you can share it with people who you think would benefit from it, all of that stuff. So, with that being said, again, my name is John. I'm the pastor at Northwind. We're just excited you're here tonight. If you want to come see what we do on any given Saturday night, we meet right here, 6:30, in this very room. You can come hang out with us and see what God is doing through us and with us. If I haven't met you yet, I think I've met everyone. If I haven't, come talk to me, say hi. I'd love to meet you a little bit more. And otherwise, go in peace. All right? And eat the food.